Alrighty, we're going to get started, but I'm going to go ahead and give a few minutes for everyone to come in the room. This is Ms. Honigfeld saying, Dr. Delgado, will there be captioning? This is Dr. Delgado speaking. If you can, please keep all your microphones off and while you're joining, and keep your cameras off would be great, please. I see we have more people joining in. Okay, this is Dr. Delgado speaking. I see that we have more people coming in. We're going to let them join in one at a time, but we'll go ahead and get started now. All right, so thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Dr. Natalie Delgado. I am in charge of outreach coordination for deaf education here in the state of Louisiana. Some of you might be joining us from other states. This is great. We're happy because the information today will apply anywhere in the US. And we're really excited tonight to have our guest speaker. Her name is Sarah Honigfeld. And her name looks like the sign excited. She's from the state of Colorado, but she is going to be our resident expert tonight about IFSP. She'll explain what that means. And if any of you is new to our workshop, we need you to please stay muted. Make sure your microphones are muted and your video stay off. And if you have any questions, we will have a Q&A at the end. But if you'd like to have a question that you don't want to lose, please type them in the chat. We will not answer the questions right away. We'll do that at the end, but do type it anyway. If you have a question that you would like to do, that you'd like to ask in sign language, we can do that at the end as well. Now, if there are any kind of technical issue, feel free to contact me directly in the chat. And if not, I'll go ahead and turn my video off for the duration of the workshop. If anyone needs to have the captions turned on, it is available. It is the automatic captioning at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If there's no question for me, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Okay, yes, hello everyone. Good evening. My name is Sarah. This is my sign name. So the reason that this is my sign name is I'm always excited. It's really nice to see everyone. You'll see the way I present. It is kind of, you know, very, very lighthearted. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Dr. Delgado. And tonight we're going to talk about IFSP. What is the foundation of IFSP? How can the families be involved in advocacy for their deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind children? So this will talk about development of IFSP and what the next steps will be. So first, we're going to start with introductions. I'm going to explain who I am, my background, how I got here, what I'm doing now, and then I'll talk a little bit about what IFSP means and, you know, what the different parts of it are and what exactly, how that's involved in early intervention for deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind students who have an IFSP. After that, I'm going to give you some examples of advocacy efforts within the IFSP. I'm also going to give you both perspectives from both the family, how you can build advocacy, and also from the policy perspective, how you can build advocacy within the IFSP. So we're going to start with really some basics for all of you. And state by state, it does vary how the families are involved. And so also the policies in general, I will talk about, and basically what resources are available for families. After that, I will open it up to questions and comments for everyone here in the audience. We'll do that at the very end, as Dr. Delgado mentioned. She did already explain that, and at any point you can feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions or you think of something. Go ahead and write it in the chat. I'm going to share my screen. I know it's a little limited right now to be able to pull up the chat, so I'm not able to see that at the same time. So I will wait until the end of my presentation, and then I'll stop sharing screen. And then, you know, I know people are thinking I'm ignoring them, but I'm not. I will get to you all at the end. Okay. All right, let's go. Ready to roll. Okay, so who am I? I'm a deaf adult. I grew up bilingual, bimodal. So to explain what that means, I grew up speaking and signing. My family is hearing, and they all picked up sign language once they realized that I was deaf. We started to sign. And I was born in Chicago. Luckily, I had very strong, communication there. And at that point, my family moved to Connecticut. And Connecticut has the American School for the Deaf. And so we were able to use sign language there. So during the first year, my parents were using total communication, which was not a great match for me. We were trying to figure out how to really make it the best communication. So I was able to develop language, spoken language plus sign language, which is a really nice experience for my parents to be able to see total communication and, you know, both approaches. So I was there from kindergarten, basically until my undergrad and college. I was mainstreamed, which means that I was the deaf person in a classroom full of hearing students. My teacher was hearing, and all the context was given to me in spoken language. So at that point, I had an ASL interpreter who would go to classes with me, and after school activities and sports, and really all the activities at school, I had an ASL interpreter with me at the whole time. So really it depended how I would use the interpreter. Sometimes I would speak for myself. Sometimes I would have the interpreter clarify the message. Sometimes she would speak for me. So really it varied how I would use my interpreter. During undergrad, I went to Boston, and when I finished school there, I went to Washington, D.C. to Gallaudet University. And at that point, I became a school counselor, and I was involved in a bachelor's program for counseling. When I was there, I didn't really feel as though it was my favorite. I did love the students, of course. I really enjoyed that. But the system kind of felt a little disconnected with the families. I felt like the family involvement was not as much as I would like it to be. So I decided to focus on early intervention. And that was birth to 3. So that, and then it actually depends on the state. Some states it goes up to age 5. So I became an early interventionist. I became certified and started working in that field. And then I moved, well, while I was in Massachusetts, and then I was working birth to 3 for deaf and hard of hearing and bilingual program. So that was under a local school for the deaf there in Massachusetts. And then I worked at the Center for the Deaf, the LeClaire Center for the Deaf. They're actually the ones who ran that program. I was there for several years, and then I moved here to Colorado. So the reason that I moved here was I am a doctoral student studying EDD, which means a doctoral degree in educational leadership for children. So at the same time, when I moved, I set up my own business as a consultant for several different states, different programs, agencies all over, teaching them how to run bilingual programs for deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind students. So that was all over the country that I started working. And working an educational policy specialist for the National Association for the Deaf, NAD. And so while there, I started, looking at the federal and the state level policies basically making sure that all of the policies were appropriately matched for deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind students all over the country. So that gave me, basically everything to where I am now. All right, so that's who I am. And again, I am so excited to be here. So I really do want to emphasize that through this lens, I just want to explain what the lenses this presentation is presented through today. It's through my background, through my value system, and my beliefs. So I want to tell you how that guides my approach to working with families. So I do have a very strong philosophical base, which is family-centered approach. So what that means is I want to honor the family first and foremost. Who is the family? What are their strengths? What is their community like? What are their values? I want to learn about what their priorities are. And then once I do, I can use that to guide my services. That can guide my approaches, guide recommendations that I make. That really is the most important part of the philosophical foundation, working in this field for myself. At the same time, because of my personal background as a deaf adult, with the bimodal, bilingual, being raised that way, I do find it important to give visual access for deaf, deafblind, and hard of hearing children. So I do use that bilingual approach. So what that means is many of the recommendations that I give, the comments and the different resources that I offer are based on the family's values. So it's important to keep that in the back of the mind when you're looking at this presentation tonight. So would I say that everyone is the same? No, probably not. And that's okay. Everyone does this job differently. Families are exposed to several different views around them, different philosophies, different approaches, and mine is only one approach of several. So I do feel as though, I'm happy to be here tonight because I can share what my approach is with all of you. Okay, so before I really go into depth, let's back up a little bit and talk about what the IFSP is. What exactly is it? So the acronym is Individual Family Service Plan, IFSP. So it is at the federal level. It's a document. It's an actual agreement between both the family and the team. So whoever the providers are, community members who are involved with the IFSP. All of that is formally written down. Everyone signs, everyone on the team signs, the family signs, and whoever is invited to that meeting, they will all be involved in this legal agreement. And so with the family, they're curious like, oh, what does the IFSP mean? And if they're not satisfied with it, they won't sign it. So the family does have the right, under the federal guidelines, they do have the right to request that the IFSP have a meeting to modify, make amendments and changes, and review the IFSP. So the most important thing is no changes can be made on the IFSP without the family's signature. They have to agree and formally sign it, that they accept all of the changes. So the family at this point is really guiding the whole process. Now, they're the most important part, pushing everything through. I know often with the IFSP meetings, within the development, I know it feels really overwhelming for the family. They don't understand maybe what some of the wording means, and they might feel like they're going to be brushed off. The team is going to move forward without them. But I really encourage the family to understand that this IFSP is their family's rights to know what they can and can't include in the IFSP. So they need to know what they can request, and it's the families that need to know that they have the power to make decisions for the IFSP, whatever is appropriate for their child. Yeah, so the goal of today's presentation is to really explain in depth about the IFSP and the family's role in advocacy for the actual IFSP development process. The IFSP itself, it is a legal document, like I said before, and I'm going to review all of the separate parts of the IFSP. So the early intervention services for the family, it should list all of that, basically every single service that the child is going to receive, every service that the family is going to receive as well through early interventionists, and that's all part of that plan. So they're going to have everything ready. It will say basically how often, whether it's going to be every week or 2 weeks that they're receiving services, if it's going to be an hour, if it's going to be 5 hours, all of that will be included in the IFSP. The IFSP also should guide services and it will explain what the goals are for the student. All of that should be included. And, you know, for deciding which services are appropriate for your student, and what the goals are, that should really make sure that they match in the document. So the team is also supposed to be able to review all of the goals and make sure they match what the services are. The two should correlate. So one thing about the IFSP that
So what I really enjoy about the IFSP is that it is a federal requirement that it has to be reviewed every 6 months. The family and the team come together as a discussion to review the IFSP. It is on an annual basis. It is standard in all states, set for 1 year, meaning that every year the IFSP must be reviewed, and everyone must make sure that everything that the students still qualify for the services, that you're still eligible. Sometimes modification and amendments can be made, and the IFSP can be changed every year. And sometimes during about a 6-month period, about halfway throughout the year, we also have another revision. So it lasts a year. There's a 3-month revision. And 3 times a year, the family and the team will come together and have an in-depth discussion of the goals, whether they are being met or not. If they are not being met, the reason why and what steps can be taken to accomplish them. Perhaps the family feels that the goals no longer apply to their students. So all this is noted. So it's nice because once the student has been part of it for 3 years, there's a lot of documentation, and you can see your child's progress during the 3 years. It's great, and that document can be used to show how your child has progressed. For example, a parent can say, my child has started with using only 2 signs, and look how they progress so far. So you can definitely notice those types of progress. The IFSP also should only be family-centered, strength-based. And why is that? Because who's doing most of the leading and the encouragement and the exposure for the child? Is it the service provider? No, it's not. Let me go a little bit more in depth on as far as the reason why. Sometimes the specialist will come to the house for a couple of hours a week. And when that's done, sometimes the child will be awake for perhaps 10 hours a day. Some of you might say, no, my child is awake for 15 hours a day. But I'm just saying, as an average, a child is awake for about 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that makes a total of 70 hours of awake time. So as a service provider, when I go to the house for 2 hours a week, what's happening to the other 68 hours? Who is with that child at that time? Is it me as the provider? Do I spend the days and nights at the house? No, it's not. It's the family. So the family has to be the center of providing attention, approach, of preparing, exposing the child to what is needed. So they are the ones who are responsible. So the IFSP is family-based. And it's very important that the IFSP be designed to support the family and to use their strengths to develop the IFSP. That is how the child will be more successful. The child will grow more. The IFSP should be family-centered and strength-based. So that is what the IFSP is. And next, I'm going to discuss the different parts of it. First, we have the front page, and where we include the typical basic information, the parent's name, the child's name, perhaps the child's ID or Department of Health ID, address, contact information, and so forth. That would be on the first page. On the second, we have perhaps the state, maybe the agency, state agency, and then the family page. The family page goes a little bit more in depth as far as the family background and various information. What are their values? What do they love about their child? What are the child's strengths? What are their concerns? Sometimes the family page will ask the family for their daily routine. What happens during the child's life during the day? Where do they stay? What does it look like? Sometimes the family page will ask the family about their concern relating to the family itself. Is there enough food? Are the finances sufficient for the house? And does the family feel safe? All of that is noted. So the family page varies, depending on the state, depending on the agency. And sometimes there are no family pages. Following that, we will have the report, which is attached, the paper at the back, and the next paper. So we have evaluation assessments. Typically, we'll have the application for evaluation and assessment see if the child is eligible. So there's an assessment evaluation done at that time. The state typically have a list of which evaluation and assessment that the agency can choose to determine the child's eligibility. There are also various developmental domains like cognitive ability, motor development, communication, adaptive, self-care, and various other top domains relating to development. So all of these are analyzed and are noted in the report. And in there, we include the child's strength. What are they able to do? What is the child at this point not yet able to do? What should they focus next on the child development? That page is attached next to the first page. Following that, once all that information is gathered, the team will meet together with the family and develop a set of goals. Those goals can be based on the evaluation, on the assessment. If something shows that the child might be behind a certain area, maybe a plan is made to enrich the child and catch them up on that area. If there was any kind of concern in the family that are expressed by the family members, perhaps language delay or perhaps social ability, those can be set as goals. There are no very specific rules on what can and cannot be put on there. It depends on the team and the discussion within the team and the family. Is whatever is a good fit for the child and for the family. Next, we'll have the service grid. The service grid, as I just explained, there's an in-depth explanation of the provider, the number of hours that will be provided, the regularity, is it a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly event? All this is noted. Who and which discipline will be represented? For example, is it a development specialist, an occupational therapist, speech language pathologist? All this information will be noted with which specialist will be used. The families that I work with usually have pages and pages of service grids, meaning that they're receiving tons of services, which is fine, it's perfectly fine. I want to emphasize a point too, that the grid is not a static document. It can change. It doesn't have to be set for the year. Perhaps one service would only be needed for a couple of weeks and another service might be ongoing for the entire year. Sometimes a service might not start until the 6-month review. The team might decide to add a service. So that grid is a document that can be modified. The following page is the transition planning. That typically happens in 2 instances. One is when the child turns 2.5 years old, or 2.5 and 6 months, deciding where the child, what is the plan for when the child turns 3, because once the child is 3-year-old, the part C is over and he transitions to part B until he or she is at the age of 20. So the IFSP no longer apply and it becomes now an IEP, which is under the education program. So at the age of 3, that's what happens to many children. It's not necessarily a graduation. So that's something that you'll discuss with your team as far as what is the plan? Do you want an IEP or do you not want an IEP? That discussion typically starts when the child is 2.5 years old. Here's my tidbit. I feel like you should have that discussion prior to 2.5 years old because you want to plan and be ready for the future, have that in mind. But the federal requirement is to have that discussion or to plan for transition by 2.5 years old, and it has to be noted in the IFSP at that point. A second time where you'll discuss transition will be if the child might move to another, under an agency, or move to out of state, perhaps move to a different country. So that will be noted in how the EI agency will deal with the family transition. The support might be perhaps finding resources near the child's new home, perhaps providing book and literature or strategies for the family to be aware of so that they can continue working on those projects after the transition is completed. And transition can include referrals to other agencies, referral to other programs. It includes a lot of things. That is a requirement that it be included in the IFSP. And I can count how many times the file is often closed when the child turns 3 years old and people realize that they have not documented the transition and it has to be done in a rush. So make sure that the IFSP has everything, contains everything that is well documented. Another part of the transition plan is when you share resources with the family. Perhaps the family is concerned about food safety, housing safety. Those can be noted, and what are resources have been shared with the family for that. It can be community events, community resources that are provided to the family. It can be a family-to-family network. Those can be noted on the IFSP on the family resource page. Last page is the signature page. This is where you put your stamp of approval. And then you can start moving on. So if you think about your this presentation, you think about your service grid, and you're noticing that some services are not noted on there or haven't started yet, then you remember that this document is a legal document. It is legally binding, meaning that if something is noted on your IFSP, but it has not been implemented yet, you make sure to remind them, show the document and make sure that it is followed. The team has to strictly follow the IFSP. Now I'll put on the right side different consideration on the slideshow that apply to each part of the IFSP, okay? The language environment. That relates to not only the language that the family uses, but also the language that the family wants to use. So when you review the family page, I strongly suggest that you document and explain to the team, have them document saying that perhaps the family is Spanish speaking at home and like to use spoken English and wants to use American Sign Language, and perhaps don't yet use American Sign Language, but would like to. So ask for that information to be listed on the family page. The reason why I say that is because once you documented that goal, those priorities and wishes, the language that the family uses, it means that from then on, the IFSP team must consider these points when discussing the IFSP, how to apply to the family environment. Separation of languages. That is a pretty sticky one. 50% of my job is related to that topic. When you have an evaluation or an assessment, and oftentimes I encourage the family to ask to please document which language they use. For example, the assessment that we use in the past in the state of Massachusetts that I used to live at was called BDI, Bethel Development Inventory, BDI, I'm sorry. The spoken language communication part had many questions relating to the child. See how the child can answer. Oftentimes, the provider goes into their home, provides the assessment. They know the child is deaf or hard of hearing, but will still try to speak and gesture and sign at the same time. Now, the child has a response. The provider writes it down, but the problem is we don't know which language the child is responding to. So how do we know which language they are strong, they are proficient at? As the IFSP, how do we know which language they are able to respond to? They might still be struggling with some languages, with some vocabulary skills, from language skills. There might be some weakness and strengths in there, and we don't know what those are. So I strongly encourage family to ask the provider to do the assessment and jot down exactly which language the child is responding to. That might require a little extra work on their part, but it's an important part of the assessment. And I think that is a very fair request to ask, because that information will lead to the entire IFSP process. So it's so important that the family be aware of that, empower themselves to make those requests and to know which language the child responds to. Now, it is important to remember regarding general qualifications, assessment, and evaluation to not to know that those are not normed. What I mean by that is that they are not designed specifically for deaf and hard of hearing children. Those who created those forms make them very broad so that they can apply to various languages. So they're not designed to specifically assess deaf and hard of hearing children's ability, special development, and so forth. So the eligibility assessment has to be done, but you can ask the provider to document which language is used and which language the child responds to. You can also request the assessment provider and evaluation to see if they have something designed for deaf and hard of hearing children. There may be a spoken language evaluation for hard of hearing children, and it can be an ASL one specifically for deaf and hard of hearing children as well. Those two assessments should be separated, and that will give you rich information about the child's development. This will guide you in the IFSP development, and honestly, it will give you clear and in-depth information. I recommend that families request that. Request a separation of languages when you receive the evaluation. So request a separate evaluation.
Okay, so request the separate evaluation and give the team all of the information about what the goals are for services. So often when working with deaf and hard of hearing children, providers will come in, trying to understand which language and which communication mode is used. But the children have other needs as well, and sometimes those needs are not focused on. So in the IFSP, when you're putting down the goals for services, you don't only want to focus on language and communication. Now, if your child is showing needs in other areas, make sure you go ahead and request services for other early interventionists to focus on. I have noticed in the past when I've made this recommendation for children who are coming from a hearing family as opposed to, a deaf family. So it's great if they are signing in the household, but often hearing parents are trying to model the hand shapes. However, they're not exactly correct for ASL. So, it's not a huge problem, but it would be very nice to have some additional support, really to cultivate the facial expressions, the hand shapes, and then the family would benefit from that as well, because they can learn the correct hand shapes and the correct grammatical expressions and body shifting, and really everything that they can use through occupational therapy. So that would be a huge benefit to the family. I know it sounds a little bit odd, but it really does work. The children who are struggling with hand shapes tend to also struggle with motor skills and with their fine motor skills more specifically. So they do often struggle with trying to do the letters. And if they were to have occupational therapy, it would provide that strength for fine motor skills. They would be able to become a little more skilled with their fine motor skills so they can sign. I do often make that recommendation for children who grow up in hearing families to have occupational therapy provided, because it really does often improve their fine motor skills for both the children and the parents, honestly. Often the parents themselves become a lot more skilled with signing. And so you get to see both of them, and it's really nice to play with that. They practice picking up small things, and it really does help develop their fine motor skills as well for the parents. So that is one example, I would say, of an additional focus for services. So you should really reach out to your early intervention team and say what is available, because my child is not only deaf, my child has other needs that we want to focus on, and other goals that we want to work on. It's important to include those as well. Now, culture and identity is a very important part of this process. Culture and identity does not necessarily only mean deaf culture. I'm talking about the background of the family. So the early intervention team can ask the student when they're receiving services to introduce them to deaf adults who have similar backgrounds even, who have the same type of cultural background, same experiences growing up. Deaf adults being introduced to the family are a huge support, being able to introduce them to different, networks. And so they can show them that there's already all these different resources available for them. And, it's a little bit less difficult for the family once they can see, oh, look at these deaf and hard of hearing adults being successful out in the world, doctoral students. We have deaf doctors, we have deaf engineers, we have deaf lawyers, and they get to see that everyone in the family gets to really be exposed to that deaf world. And so getting to include that part of culture and identity for the child in their life and the family as well is incredibly important. And that can be requested, just so you know, that can be offered in early intervention services. So you can make that request. That is a resource that's available. The early intervention team does need to put that down under the resource page as a service that the family wants to have provided for the introduction to deaf and hard of hearing adults. Now, for family support and resources, again, you do need to document the request for family services on the service grid, like I was talking about before. So for social workers or anything related to mental health, nursing, if there's any other, areas of your life where you feel like I'm kind of having a hard time, I'm not really sure how to manage this and support my child, you can request additional services for your family, not only for your child. Many families don't realize that. However, you are able to request a social worker to come in and help with looking for resources, or you can request some mental health services if you notice that you're going through the grief process and you're not sure how to navigate that. I want to be the best parent for my child. You can request services to help you work through that. So that's part of the C. That's family centered, like I said before. It's not just child centered. So I do want to emphasize that the federal guideline does recognize that the family is a very important part of this. You have to be included in the family services. I did already briefly mention this, but again, you can document that on the IFSP to have deaf and hard of hearing mentors and be introduced to adults in the community. ASL resources as well, ASL services, you can request that in your IFSP. You can document that. When you're putting all of the goals, ASL service is a goal that you can request. So I have noticed this happen when families have said, yeah, my EI team reached out and I want to document ASL services in the service grid. I do want that. So there's 3 responses that typically happen. One is, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's great. That was easy. The second response is, we could, but we don't have that. So we're going to have to look outside of our agency, which is okay. You might have to wait a little bit. You might have to find some other resources that can be sent and shared with the EI team. You can directly share it to them. They can make an agreement, a contract with an outside agency to be able to come into the home to provide ASL services. Now, the third response is, no, we don't provide that. Nope, you're going to have to take care of that yourself. Now, if that happens to you, you should document it. If the family is requesting ASL services, you still need to write it down, because it is part of their responsibility to meet the needs of the family. And if they're not meeting the needs of the family, they do need to contract with an outside provider. They can have a partnership with a local school for the deaf, a partnership or something with, a college that teaches ASL classes. There should be a way to find resources. And they still need to be able to work within the family to provide resources for them. The most important thing is that you document everything. Now, I can't say that enough. You know, like I said, you don't want to take this to court. It's not something that you want to get lawyers involved or anything like that. But you do need to know your rights. Like I said, it is a federal guideline from the government. So you do need to know that. And it is very important that people understand that. As soon as you say that, they're going to basically understand and agree. You can say, I know my right. And it's easy enough to say that, and you have everything documented as proof. Now, if not, if you face a lot of resistance, I'm going to give you some resources in a little bit that I think, you know, will help out. Places you can contact within your state, different agencies. I'm going to throw some of that out a little bit later, closer to the end, so that you have resources at your disposal if you feel a little bit like there's a barrier or frustrated. Support with listening technology. So some families are like, well, I can't buy hearing aids, they're very expensive. So, you know, if your child is under 18, you're not supposed to have to pay for your child's hearing aid. That's a different story. So if you are a little bit limited on resources, you're not sure where you can find listening technology or devices, and you don't really know, you know, what do we do if we lose them, or how do we use them? You can ask your EI team to provide resources, and that may require the early intervention team to look for outside support, perhaps have a contract, an audiologist who can meet with the family once a month to check if the technology is working, if the signal is working, and they can kind of give you guidance on how it should work. If the child keeps taking it off, throwing it away, you know, their cochlear or their hearing aid, they will also work with the audiologist or a teacher of the deaf. And you can work with the teacher of the deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, who can help you with that technology. So you can ask your team to help you find some resources. Again, documented on your IFSP, and you can have that. Okay, so now I've discussed all the different parts of the IFSP, the different considerations. Now I want to give you some examples of advocacy, some strategies to use during your meeting. Now, when you have a team who's trying to say no about, you know, language or the assessment, you know, ASL, spoken English, what even is, you know, put down on the document to be provided for the assessment, if they're just saying no and being resistant, you can go to 0 to 3. This is a nationwide resource, and it will give you several different guidelines. It will explain how you can support young children from 0 to 3 within the agency. That organization has a wealth of information. So they have about multi-language learning, and really emphasizes the separation of language and including the family language. So you can take a look at that, and you can actually send it to your early intervention team and say, look at this. You know, look at this organization. It says that I should be able to include all of these things within the plan. And I think that will help support you. It helps justify why you have the right to do the separation of language. Now,
Perfect. So how do we add team members to your service schedule and who might not be employed by your servicing agency? Well, look at IDEA. What does IDEA stand for? Individual with Disability Education Act. Its Part C services is under IDEA, right? So if you really want to add somebody, say, hey, I know my rights, drop in IDEA and people will bend to your wills. IDEA describe that outside services, outside contractors may be required if this team is not able to meet the family's need within the team. So it is written right there. You have the documentation to prove it. The natural environment, this will come up if, say, you want your child to experience play with other peers, deaf peers, same language user, same hearing technology. You want your child to experience that identity, a group experience. Some agencies will say, oh, it's not something that we provide because IDEA says a natural environment, so we only provide the services in the home. Sorry, we're not going to help you with that. Well, IDEA Part C does emphasize the natural environment. Yes, with an exception if the child in the natural environment does not socialize with other children with the similar language use and similar background. If that does not happen, then the services can be provided in a group setting or outside of that immediate environment that is considered in natural environment. So that is part of IDEA. There is an exception to the rule of natural environment. Another comment, another discussion that can be made for many deaf and hard hearing children, an issue is the isolation within the family, being the only deaf, deafblind, or hard hearing child. So they need to be with deaf, deafblind, or hard hearing children. That becomes another natural environment compared to being the only one surrounded by the family or the caregiver who are all entirely hearing. So you can discuss that, and you can cite IDEA Part C saying that there is an exemption that applies to your child. Last thing related to hearing levels. Some, or I should say many children actually, all children really live on a range of hearing level, from mild hearing loss to profound, bilateral, unilateral. Some have cochlear implants, some use hearing aids. There's a variety there. So for this experience, many children who maybe have unilateral hearing loss or hearing loss in one ear, or might have only mild hearing level, the family struggles to receive the proper service, the right service. They struggle to receive access to speech language pathologists or therapy early. They struggle to have access to American Sign Language services. Because the team will often look at the child saying, well, that child is fine, has enough hearing, so they can do fine, but that's not acceptable. If you look at the JCIH, which stands for Joint Committee Infant Hearing, Joint Commission on Infant Hearing, JCIH, they have a plethora of recommendations online relating to that. They are there ready for you to find. And it's also another federal law that relates to working with deaf and hard of hearing children, and it is based on the JCIH recommendations. So it's very powerful. The JCIH has specific recommendations relating to children who have hearing loss in one ear or maybe mild hearing loss levels. They still require to have equal access to services, speech language therapy, pathology, American Sign Language services, regardless of the hearing level, regardless of the type of hearing technology that they use, and regardless of any prior situation, residual hearing, or whatever there is. All of this, any child with any sort of level of low hearing is at risk for language deprivation, for delay in social and emotional development. Because of all of these reasons and these experiences that have been noticed, it is from children who do not fully have incidental learning using their hearing. Sometimes agencies will refuse to provide services for mild hearing level or for children who have cochlear implant. But you can look at the JCIH and cite it, point it out to them. The policy says clearly that your child still has the right and needs access to that list of services. Those are very specific examples of advocacy. Now, finally, some resources I want to share with you all before I wrap up. I can believe this is going really fast. I've already mentioned Deaf and Hard of Hearing Adults and Family Network. And they can be a shared reading project based on Gallaudet University Regional Center. And then it can also be Deaf Mentor Program, Deaf Mentoring Program, or project, I believe. It can be a Deaf Coach. Another kind of deaf or hard of hearing, a deaf-blind adult of any kind that you can find. American Sign Language classes. Sometimes your local school for the deaf has family community classes. Sometimes the local university offers them. If there are none, look online. There are many options for deaf-led American Sign Language classes and resources. ASL Connect, ASL VAT, and so forth, different websites that are deaf-led American Sign Language resources. Meeting other families, find ways to socialize with other families with deaf and hard of hearing children in your state. Some states have local Hands and Voices chapters that will hold family events that you can attend and mingle with other families. There are deaf events too. The deaf community in your area might host some events. Perhaps I heard that there are baseball games together. You might go bowling with a group. So go ahead and get involved in these. You can request to have a private evaluation and assessment relating to American Sign Language. Often you have a deaf adult who is certified to provide an American Sign Language assessment. There are local, it varies by locality and by state, but nationwide also we have national resources, sources of knowledge, of policies and information about how to raise a deaf and hard of hearing child. For policy support, you can contact the National Association of the Deaf, NAD. Oh, you can contact me directly. You have my information. A little bit of advertising for my other hats, but NAD has a page on their website that has a list of resources that you can go to for ideas, how to choose advocates, policies, how different options that you have. There's the Clerk Center at Gallaudet University. Their website is incredible. There's so many resources on there. There's a variety of topics: language acquisition, language deprivation, deaf and hard of hearing adults, storytelling. I mean, it is amazing working with deaf professionals. The resources are very in-depth, they're excellent. And some are family friendly and some are more related to policy and research. So there's a wide range. It touches on many topics and it's great to look at. The American Society for Deaf and Children, or ASDC, has a lot of deaf-friendly resources related to American Sign Language. So if there's nothing local, look at that. Look at the ASDC. They have more resources there. Last is the National Center for Deafblind, the NCDB. So many resources there as well related to work with the children who are deaf and blind. And they have a list of different deaf and deafblind adult interventions that they can provide support, how you can receive services for young children, all sorts of resource articles. So it's pretty cool. And those are national resources that you can look at. So that is my presentation for tonight. Again, I just summarized everything. We could go on for hours and hours on this topic, but this is just a brief overview that I want to share with you all. And I want to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Delgado because you all may have some questions. I will try to answer as many questions as possible. If not possible, I hope that Dr. Delgado will email me your question so that whatever question you may ask so that I can share the answers with everyone. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen. This is Dr. Delgado. Thank you. That was so much information. We hope that it was helpful for all the families who are watching tonight. Also, I want to share with you a few other resources that we have locally for families who live here in Louisiana. If you have a child IFSP at work, we have the PPEP program. It's an advocacy program where families can come can attend the IFSP meeting with the family. And then another resource that we have here close to us is our Louisiana Deafblind Project. If you have a child who's deafblind, invite that organization to provide feedback and support your child IFSP goals. If you need other specific resource for specific situation, you can contact us. We're happy to share more resources with you that might be a better fit for you. So now let's open the floor to questions. Any question that you might have, feel free to either type it in the chat. You may also turn on your camera to sign your answer in ASL. Your question, I'm sorry. This is Ms. Honigfeld saying, yes, I believe we've been very thorough today. I have shared my contact information with Dr. Delgado. So if someone has a question that comes up later after the Zoom meeting is over, go ahead and send them. I'm also available on Instagram. I have an Instagram page specifically for those early intervention resources. It's called That Deaf EI Lady. So THAT, Deaf, DEAF, EI Lady. I share a lot of information on their resources and tips, strategies, so you can always contact me via Instagram as well. If you think of something, you know, I typically respond within a week, or at least I attempt to. This is Dr. Delgado speaking. If any of you perhaps forgot something and you want to go back and look at the video tonight, it will be recorded and uploaded on the LSD website. If you go to lalsd.org, click on Outreach and look at Family Workshop Library. You can access the recording for, I think it'll be uploaded in a couple of days, and then you'll be able to access it. And if you don't mind, perhaps typing your email, Sarah, typing your email in the chat. If anyone has missed it, they can contact you that way. Double check your email, perhaps. And this is Ms. Honigfeld. Oh, thank you. I forgot about that. I got it now. Thank you very much. I fixed it. It's Dr. Delgado speaking. If we have any question, any other comments from the audience, we're happy to take them now. We have a few minutes left, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for also our expert for joining us as well. It's Ms. Honigfeld saying, it was my pleasure to be here with you all. This is Dr. Delgado speaking. Well, I hope that we'll see some of you next month. We'll have Dr. Sarah Specs presenting about the basics related to cochlear implants and hearing aids, how to work with different types of amplification, and the pros and cons of each. We'll describe that a little bit more in depth. So we're excited to have her here next month. If you want to register for that program, look on the LSE website, found the registration form on there. We have a Mel Noel who says, thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining us, Mel. All righty, I'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you all. I hope you have a great night. Bye-bye.